You can be mad at me in the comment section as long as you comment. Hey, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be covering powerlifting and how to ensure that you've kind of maximized your genetic potential, how to know maybe that you've actually gotten to your genetic potential. And that's going to be covering some programming. We're going to talk about recovery strategies and some of the studies that go along with those. So to start off, I'm not a powerlifter. I don't compete. I don't necessarily train people who would compete in powerlifting. So I've learned a lot during the process of researching this, but I'm sure there's things that I've missed that might be obvious to somebody else. So if you enjoy the information, please let me know, subscribe, check out Instagram. If you don't like it, great, let me know. I could use the critiquing on this subject because I'm not super familiar with it and I might as well learn a little bit extra. So as you advance in weightlifting in general, you're gonna find plateaus, right? And you're gonna get that in weightlifting, you're gonna get that in powerlifting, you're gonna get that in any sport. How do you know that you've reached your genetic potential? Well, you kind of don't. So what we're going to be talking about some of the more nuanced techniques and information that I could find based on the subject, and we're going to be talking about things that don't really apply to the average person, but they're going to apply to the people who are trying to eke out that extra % or 0.5% near the top of what they can do. And we'll start with the bench press. According to this study that I found that delves into the difference between bench pressing and bench throws, which is exactly what it sounds like. I didn't know anything about this before I looked it up, but there was a study about rugby players and how they were able to generate more force through the throws, and that seemed to be beneficial to them in a power sense. Now, I would never suggest anybody throws a barbell up, even if it's lightweight. But if you are going to do it on a Smith machine and do it with lightweight. Again, I don't know any place that you should be doing this at. You're probably kicked out of Planet Fitness. But if you are going to do it as safe as you can. The bench throws seem to generate a little bit of extra power. So if you're interested in trying that out, that might be something to do. So if you consider the muscle fibers themselves and how the whole purpose of working out is to damage them and subsequently repair them. So if you damage too much and it's not all repaired, then obviously you lost a little bit of what you could have gotten. So the goal is to damage as much as you can and repair as much as you can. And you want those to mesh, right? There's also this study where they had the subjects, specifically for the leg extensions, do different time under tension stresses. So they would do 6-second concentric and 6-second eccentric motions. I don't remember the exact difference in muscle growth, but it was significant, and I'll pull it up so you can see it. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that subject in general, but I think that the type of stress using that time and attention is significant. I would imagine, I really wish that they had done the study a little differently, and instead of having just the variable group go 6-second both ways for a 12-second rep, I think that they should have done different portions of subjects to where one subject group did 6-second concentric and then they lowered it pretty quickly, like a second or 2 seconds, and then they focused on that, and the other one just the eccentric, and then the other one doing both. And I think that you would have seen a very big difference between those three, even if the time and attention total was about the same. If you think about the stress of the muscle fibers, if you are doing an exercise too quickly, so that initial power output is going to generate, so that it's generating enough momentum and inertia such that you're not stressing all the extra muscle fibers for the rest of the exercise as much as you could be doing. So if you slow it down and you ensure that momentum is not carrying the weight, and you go as slow as you can pretty much, without just like not moving at all, then you're going to hit as much of that muscle as you possibly can for that range of motion. And you're going to be stressing out all the muscle fibers along the way at an equivalent amount. So I think that the muscle growth, the volume, not necessarily the strength, but the actual volume of muscle is going to be coming from that portion of the exercise. I would argue that the perfect rep would be a 5 or 6 second concentric and then 1 to 2 second eccentric. So you don't want to hurt yourself coming back down. And you want to spend your time as effectively as you can. And if most of the benefits are coming from that concentric motion without the inertia, then that's where the exercises need to be spent. So how does this relate to powerlifting specifically? Well, it doesn't really directly, but I would argue that if you could have more mass, more muscle mass, then you're going to have the ability to lift more anyway. So if nothing else, this would ensure that you're getting to your genetic potential of muscle mass. And then from there, you could tune that into the powerlifting procedures and programming, and then see how that benefited and if that's something that's sustainable. Also important to note that during these exercises, specifically the leg extensions, they did about 30% of what they would expect. You do need to lower the weight and make sure that you can do the exercise, right? Now we're going to talk about the bench press. The most limiting position is going to be all the way down when the bar is pretty much on your chest, and then that first 15% of the range of motion from there to up. So that's where your chest is going to be most strained, and that's where you're probably going to see the most injuries. So that being said, if that's the most limiting component of the bench press, and that's where you can do some extra focus. And what I mean by that is to potentially do some partials. If you want to strengthen that position and that portion of the range of motion, then you need to work out in that range of motion. So maybe after you do your set of heavier bench press, drop the weight down to about half, and in doing this, not only is it going to stretch everything out after you've worked out, but you are going to get a little bit of extra work on that lower range. So I would argue that this is going to have an impact on your bench press if it's not something you're already doing. And if nothing else, it just feels amazing. I know we're talking about the bench press now, but you're going to want to do that for the other portions of the squat and the deadlift. So the most limiting component of that to you would be probably like the start of the deadlift, maybe the first 20% of that range of motion, maybe a transition point if that's where your weak points are. For the squat, obviously when you're lowest, that is going to be the hardest part. So again, do a lighter weight, make sure you're safe, and don't bounce. This has to be controlled. If it's not controlled, you're not going to benefit from it. But if you can do that bottom 20%, the hardest 20% range of motion, do partials in there, I think that is where you're going to see the most benefit, because again, we're talking about people who are already advanced and they're pretty much at their limits. If you're just starting out, the reason to do the partials would be for the stretching, right? Because you're already going to get to the gains. But once you've reached your potential, then you're going to want to be doing these things that are going to give you a little bit extra. So I would say that these partials are going to do that, because you're going to, not only is it giving you extra blood flow to those muscles, it's going to be easier to recover because it's stretched. And then if you lower the weight, you're not going to exhaust yourself to where you can't work out with the same program timing that you already have. So there's really no downside to doing it. Now we're going to talk about recovery. We're going to split this into 2 sections. We're going to talk about recovery between your sets, and then we're going to talk about recovery like a day-to-day cessation period, right? So there are different studies that talk about how to rest between sets, and it seems to be that an active recovery is the best way. And if you think about how warming up works and you want your body temperature up, that's going to prevent the injuries, and it's going to get you into a better position to where you can start working out. If you can, especially if you're doing powerlifting and you're doing heavy sets, and then you have 3 to 5 minutes of rest between a set, you need to stay active during that set. You need to stay warm. So if you could get on a stationary or an elliptical or a treadmill, I know it's going to be irritating to go back and forth between these things, or even if you want to do some jump rope between the sets, something, right? That's going to keep your heart rate up. It's going to keep you warm. So that also is going to help you with your lactate levels, but I do think that the benefit really is going to be coming from staying warm and keeping your body going. If you slow down and stop, obviously you're stressing your body in different ways. It's better to keep it in a more, it's not static, but a more stable condition. Not only that, but if we're going to be talking about how to do some weight loss and associated with powerlifting, it's not a bad idea for a couple minutes between your sets, do some jump rope, and that's going to be some pretty intense cardio. Don't exert yourself in a way that limits the rest of your workout, but you can do enough to where it keeps you warm and you are burning a couple extra calories. Now keep in mind the study about this passive versus active recovery. I've seen there's a couple ones based on swimming, one's based on sprinting, so it's different exercises, but I do believe that the concept is going to hold true for pretty much anything, but powerlifting as well. And your programming, you're going to have recovery days, you're going to have deload weeks. There are studies that show that some ways to rest are better than others, and that it's not necessarily that they generate more power, it's that you lose less power the next time you work out. If this study supports a tapering style in a step fashion and not an exponential, like just a drop in percentage, but even more so the cessation, just like not working out for a couple of days, seem to not do as good as just the tapering in general. I would like to point out that the cessation periods, you want to limit those. You don't want to not work out for so long, because according to these studies, more than a week is too much. And then once you get to 2 weeks of cessation, then you are potentially losing your capacity. You're losing your power formation. So then you get to the argument of between 2 and 7 days, how much is enough? Well, it's going to depend on you. It's going to depend on your nutrition. It's going to depend on your endurance level. It's going to depend on your ability to recover. That's all personally dependent, but you probably don't need more than 3 days. After 3 days, if you haven't recovered by 3-4 days, then you might actually just have an injury, because your body's pretty dynamic, because your body should be able to recover faster than that. I think a week is pushing it. There are studies that show that that works out, and some people seem to really that's a hard line for them, as in you need to wait for 7 days. And I think it's just dependent on your body, right? Your body doesn't know what the calendar looks like. Just go off of what works for you when it comes to that, but don't wait too long. There's also an argument that your recovery period from a squat and your bench press is going to be different than the recovery from the deadlift. And I've heard this before, but again, I'm not into powerlifting, so I don't know much about it. But looking at this, that seems to just come from hearsay. And I know that the squat and the bench press are different than the deadlift, but it's not so different that you're going to need extra days to recover from the deadlift. You are recruiting more. It's harder to do for the deadlift. So you're working muscles at 85% of their capacity, maybe almost 100% of their capacity for the bench, for the squat, right? You're doing the same thing for the deadlift. The damage, the stress is the same. It's just there's more muscles that are stressed for the deadlift, but I don't think that your body is going to be unable to compensate for that. I would say that if you're currently waiting extra between deadlift days and how that's programmed, maybe space the same as the squat and your bench press, and then see how that feels. You probably already know this, but getting a massage is one of the best ways to recover from any of exercising in general, but especially powerlifting or weightlifting. De-stresses your body, and it promotes blood flow to the muscles. That's going to aid in your recovery. Obviously, it's hard to afford a massage every time you work out, right? But if you could put those into your programs where it's going to benefit you right before the competition or a couple weeks before the competition, then that's probably the best place to do it. But yeah, those are the things that I found. Also, I'd like to say, obviously creatine works. Make sure your body is saturated. And when you're doing your pre-workouts, you want to make sure that it's useful, right? Don't get the generic Walmart brand that's cheap, right? Look at the doses, make sure the ingredients make sense, make sure it's effective. You can look all these things up. Make sure that you're being smart with the supplements, do the research. Don't just do something because somebody gave it to you, right? If you're taking extra supplements, maybe you don't need it. I mean, I don't know. That's a different conversation. But when it comes to supplements, make sure that you're taking the things that make sense and that are actually going to be useful for you. So again, it's just calories in versus calories out. For weight loss, it's you're going to need a deficit for calories in versus calories out, and that's going to start dropping off some fat. Now the fear for powerlifting is that you also lose muscle at the same time. So you're going to want this deficit to be slow and over time. And I think the best way to do that is if your nutrition is fine and you're getting all your nutrients and you're not starving yourself, without knowing any details, right? I'm just talking to YouTube. Without knowing any details, I would say it's probably fine to keep your diet as it is, unless you want to make small substitutions. And I would say the way that you're going to create this deficit is going to be doing a little bit of cardio, like 20 to 30 minutes of walking or elliptical or something, instead of playing around with the diet itself, because obviously your body is used to a certain amount of energy and intake. But what you could do if you don't want to do the extra cardio is, again, just lower the calories, doing that, do some substitutions. Like if you drink sodas, you might as well drink diet sodas or switch to water or whatever. I know it's dumb to be like, hey, let me just switch everything at the same time. It's not super sufficient and it's hard to do. So make small substitutions that will add up and then do a little bit of cardio, and I think that's where you're going to find the most appropriate deficit for powerlifting. Because if you do reduce your calories too far and you have a huge deficit, yeah, you're going to lose muscle, which is counterproductive for powerlifting, right? It's not so bad if you're doing it for aesthetics, but for power generation, you don't want to lose any of that, and you want to have the energy available. So the best way is to have proper nutrition, and if you want to lose weight while having proper nutrition and having enough energy, the best course is going to be do just a little bit of extra cardio. 100 to 200 calorie cardio sessions a day. Probably at this point you're maintaining. I mean, if you're still gaining weight and you're in a surplus, then you need to adjust it. But if you're maintaining and you don't like the body fat percentage that you have, do an extra 100 to 200 calories burning through walking or elliptical or biking or swimming or hiking. Yeah, so that's what I found. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if I missed a bunch of stuff. Again, I'm not a power lifter. I'm sure that I screwed up parts of this. I'm missing things that are super logical to somebody else just because I don't have any experience in powerlifting. If you got something out of it, great. If you didn't, sorry I wasted your time. You can be mad at me in the comment section as long as you comment. Yeah, thanks again for watching. If you can subscribe, that'd be great. If you hit the like button, that's, I think, even better. Check me out on Instagram. I also have a Facebook page. I started doing personal training online. I've started selling pre-workout locally. Like, I don't have a distributor, so I can't ship it, but I do have it locally if you check that out. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.